Section 1 of Another Study of Woman. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Nicholas Clifford, Middlebury, Vermont, USA. Another Study of Woman by Honoré de Balzac. Translated by Ellen Marriage, 1865 to 1946, and others. Section 1. At Paris there are almost always two separate parties going on at every ball and rout. First, an official party, composed of the persons invited, a fashionable and much bored circle. Each one grimaces for his neighbour's eye. Most of the younger women are there for one person only. When each woman has assured herself that for that one she is the handsomest woman in the room, and that the opinion is perhaps shared by a few others, a few insignificant phrases are exchanged, as, "Do you think of going away soon to La Crampade?" "How well Madame de Portenduère sang!" "Who is that little woman with such a load of diamonds?" Or after firing off some smart epigrams, which give transient pleasure and leave wounds that rankle long, the groups thin out, the mere lookers-on go away, and the wax-lights burn down to the sconces. The mistress of the house then waylays a few artists, amusing people or intimate friends, saying, "Do not go yet, we will have a snug little supper." These collect in some small room. The second, the real party now begins, a party where, as of old, every one can hear what is said, conversation is general, each one is bound to be witty and to contribute to the amusement of all. Everything is made to tell, honest laughter takes the place of the gloom which in company saddens the prettiest faces. In short, where the rout ends, pleasure begins. The rout, a cold display of luxury, a review of self-conceits in full dress, is one of those English inventions which tend to mechanize other nations. England seems bent on seeing the whole world as dull as itself, and dull in the same way. So this second party is, in some French houses, a happy protest on the part of the old spirit of our light-hearted people. Only, unfortunately, so few houses protest, and the reason is a simple one. If we no longer have many suppers nowadays, it is because never, under any rule, have there been fewer men placed, established, and successful than under the reign of Louis Philippe, when the Revolution began again lawfully. Everybody is on the march, some whither, or trotting at the heels of fortune. Time has become the costliest commodity, so no one can afford the lavish extravagance of going home to morrow morning and getting up late. Hence there is no second soirée now, but at the houses of women rich enough to entertain, and since July 1830 such women may be counted in Paris. In spite of the covert opposition of the Faubourg Saint-Germain, two or three women, among them Madame d'Espard and Mademoiselle des Touches, have not chosen to give up the share of influence they exercised in Paris, and have not closed their houses. The salon of Mademoiselle des Touches is noted in Paris as being the last refuge where the old French wit has found a home, with its reserved depths, its myriad subtle byways, and its exquisite politeness. You will there still find grace of manner notwithstanding the conventionalities of courtesy, perfect freedom of talk notwithstanding the reserve which is natural to persons of breeding, and above all a liberal flow of ideas. No one there thinks of keeping his thought for a play, and no one regards a story as material for a book. In short, the hideous skeleton of literature at bay never stalks there, on the prowl for a clever sally or an interesting subject. The memory of one of these evenings especially dwells with me, less by reason of a confidence in which the illustrious de Marsay opened up one of the deepest recesses of woman's heart, than on account of the reflections to which his narrative gave rise as to the changes that have taken place in the French woman since the fateful Revolution of July. On that evening chance had brought together several persons whose indisputable merits have won them European reputations. This is not a piece of flattery addressed to France, for there were a good many foreigners present. And indeed the men who most shone were not the most famous. Ingenious repartee, acute remarks, admirable banter, pictures sketched with brilliant precision, all sparkled and flowed without elaboration, were poured out without disdain, but without effort, and were exquisitely expressed and delicately appreciated. The men of the world especially were conscious for their really artistic grace and spirit. Elsewhere in Europe you will find elegant manners, cordiality, genial fellowship, and knowledge, but only in Paris, in this drawing room, and those to which I have alluded, does the particular wit abound which gives an agreeable and changeful unity to all these social qualities, an indescribable river-like flow, which makes this profusion of ideas, of definitions, of anecdotes, of historical incidents, meander with ease. Paris, the capital of taste, alone possesses the science which makes conversation a tourney in which each type of wit is condensed into a shaft, each speaker utters his phrase and casts his experience in a word, in which every one finds amusement, relaxation, and exercise. Here then alone will you exchange ideas. Here you need not, like the dolphin in the fable, carry a monkey on your shoulders. Here you will be understood, and will not risk staking your gold pieces against base metal. Here again, secrets neatly betrayed, and talk, light or deep, play and eddy, changing their aspect and hue at every phrase. Eager criticism and crisp anecdotes lead from one to the next. All eyes are listening, a gesture asks a question, and an expressive look gives the answer. In short, and in a word, everything is wit and mind. The phenomenon of speech, which, when duly studied and well handled, is the power of the actor and the story-teller, had never so completely bewitched me. Nor was I alone under the influence of its spell. We all spent a delightful evening. The conversation had drifted into anecdote, and brought out in its rushing course some curious confessions, several portraits, and 1,000 follies, which make this enchanting improvisation impossible to record. Still, by setting these things down in all their natural freshness and abruptness, their elusive divarications, you may perhaps feel the charm of a real French evening, taken at the moment when the most engaging familiarity makes each one forget his own interests, his personal conceit, or, if you like, his pretensions. At about 2 in the morning, as supper ended, no one was left sitting round the table but intimate friends, proved by intercourse of 15 years, and some persons of great taste and good breeding who knew the world. By tacit agreement, perfectly carried out, at supper every one renounced his pretensions to importance, perfect equality set the tone, but indeed there was no one present who was not very proud of being himself. Mademoiselle des Touches always insisted on her guests remaining at table till they leave, having frequently remarked the change which a move produces in the spirit of a party. Between the dining-room and the drawing-room the charm is destroyed. According to Sterne, the ideas of an author after shaving are different from those he had before. If Sterne is right, may it not be boldly asserted that the frame of mind of a party at table is not the same as that of the same persons returned to the drawing-room? The atmosphere is not heady. The eye no longer contemplates the brilliant disorder of the dessert. Lost are the happy effects of that laxness of mood, that benevolence which comes over us while we remain in the humour peculiar to the well-filled man, settled comfortably on one of the springy chairs which are made in these days. Perhaps we are not more ready to talk face to face with the dessert, and in the society of good wine, during the delightful interval when every one may sit with an elbow on the table and his head resting on his hand. Not only does every one like to talk then, but also to listen. Digestion, which is almost always attent, is loquacious or silent, as characters differ. Then every one finds his opportunity. Was not this preamble necessary to make you know the charm of the narrative, by which a celebrated man, now dead, depicted the innocent Jesuitry of women, painting it with the subtlety peculiar to persons who have seen much of the world, and which makes statesmen such as delightful story tellers when, like Prince Talleyrand and Prince Metternich, they vouchsafe to tell a story? De Marsay, Prime Minister for some 6 months, had already given proofs of superior capabilities. Those who had known him long were not indeed surprised to see him display all the talents and various aptitudes of a statesman; still it might yet be a question whether he would prove to be a solid politician, or had merely been moulded in the fire of circumstance. This question had just been asked by a man whom he had made a préfet, a man of wit and observation, who had for a long time been a journalist, and who admired de Marsay without infusing into his admiration that dash of acrid criticism by which, in Paris, one superior man excuses himself from admiring another. "Was there ever," said he, "in your former life, any event, any thought or wish which told you what your vocation was?" asked Émile Blondet. "For we all, like Newton, have our apple, which falls and leads us to the spot where our faculties develop." "Yes," said de Marsay, "I will tell you about it." Pretty women, political dandies, artists, old men, de Marsay's intimate friends, all settled themselves comfortably, each in his favourite attitude, to look at the minister. Need it be said that the servants had left, that the doors were shut, and the curtains drawn over them? The silence was so complete that the murmurs of the coachmen's voices could be heard from the courtyard, and the pawing and champing made by horses when asking to be taken back to their stable. "The statesman, my friends, exists by one single quality," said the minister, playing with his gold and mother of pearl dessert knife, "to wit, the power of always being master of himself, of profiting more or less under all circumstances by every event, however fortuitous; in short, of having within himself a cold and disinterested other self, who looks on as a spectator at all the changes of life, noting our passions and our sentiments, and whispering to us in every case the judgment of a sort of moral ready reckoner." "That explains why a statesman is so rare a thing in France," said old Lord Dudley. "From a sentimental point of view this is horrible," the minister went on. "Hence, when such a phenomenon is seen in a young man, Richelieu, who, when warned overnight by a letter of Concini's peril, slept till midday, when his benefactor was killed at 10 o'clock; or, say, Pitt or Napoleon, he was a monster. I became such a monster at a very early age, thanks to a woman." "I fancied," said Madame de Montcornet with a smile, "that more politicians were undone by us than we could make." "The monster of which I speak is a monster just because he withstands you," replied de Marsay, with a little ironical bow. "If this is a love story," the Baronne de Nucingen interposed, "I request that it may not be interrupted by any reflections." "Reflection is so antipathetic to it," cried Joseph Bridau. "I was 17," de Marsay went on. "The Restoration was being consolidated; my old friends know how impetuous and fervid I was then. I was in love for the first time, and I was, I may say so now, one of the handsomest young fellows in Paris. I had youth and good looks, two advantages due to good fortune, but of which we are all as proud as of a conquest. I must be silent as to the rest. Like all youths, I was in love with a woman 6 years older than myself. No one of you here," said he, looking carefully round the table, "can suspect her name or recognize her. Ronquerolles at the time ever guessed my secret; he had kept it well, but I should have feared his smile. However, he is gone," said the minister, looking round. "He would not stay to supper," said Madame de Nucingen. "For 6 months, possessed by my passion," de Marsay went on, "but incapable of suspecting that it had overmastered me, I had abandoned myself to that rapturous idolatry which is at once the triumph and the frail joy of the young. I treasured her old gloves; I drank an infusion of the flowers she had worn; I got out of bed at night to go and gaze at her window; all my blood rushed to my heart when I inhaled the perfume she used. I was miles away from knowing that woman is a stove with a marble casing." "Oh, spare us your terrible verdicts!" cried Madame de Montcornet with a smile. "I believe I should have crushed with my scorn the philosopher who first uttered this terrible but profoundly true thought," said de Marsay. "You are all far too keen sighted for me to say any more on that point. These few words will remind you of your own follies. A great lady, if ever there was one, a widow without children, oh, all was perfect. My idol would shut herself up to mark my linen with her hair. In short, she responded to my madness by her own. And how can we fail to believe in passion when it has the guarantee of madness? We each devoted all our minds to concealing a love so perfect and so beautiful from the eyes of the world, and we succeeded. And what charm we found in our escapades! Of her I will say nothing. She was perfection then, and to this day is considered one of the most beautiful women in Paris, but at that time a man would have endured death to win one of her glances. She had been left with an amount of fortune sufficient for a woman who had loved and was adored, but the Restoration, to which she owed renewed lustre, made it seem inadequate in comparison with her name. In my position I was so fatuous as never to dream of a suspicion. Though my jealousy would have been of 120 Othello power, that terrible passion slumbered in me as gold in the nugget. I would have ordered my servant to thrash me if I had been so base as ever to doubt the purity of that angel, so fragile and so strong, so fair, so artless, pure, spotless, and whose blue eyes allowed my gaze to sound it to the very depths of her heart with adorable submissiveness. Never was there the slightest hesitancy in her attitude, her look, or word, always white and fresh, and ready for the beloved, like the oriental lily of the Song of Songs. "Ah, my friends," sadly exclaimed the minister, grown young again, "a man must hit his head very hard on the marble to dispel that poem." This cry of nature, finding an echo in the listeners, spurred the curiosity he had excited in them with so much skill. "Every morning, riding Sultan, the fine horse you sent me from England," de Marsay went on, addressing Lord Dudley, "I rode past her open carriage, the horse's pace being intentionally reduced to a walk, and read the order of the day signalled to me by the flowers of her bouquet, in case we were unable to exchange a few words. Though we saw each other almost every evening in society, and she wrote to me every day, to deceive the curious and mislead the observant, we had adopted a scheme of conduct, never to look at each other, to avoid meeting, to speak ill of each other. Self-admiration, swagger, or playing the disdained swain, all these old manoeuvres are not to compare on either part with the false passion professed for an indifferent person and an air of indifference towards the true idol. If two lovers will only play that game, the world will always be deceived, but then they must be very secure of each other. Her stalking horse was a man in high favour, a courtier, cold and sanctimonious, whom she never received at her own house. This little comedy was performed for the benefit of simpletons and drawing-room circles, who laughed at it. Marriage was never spoken of between us. 6 years' difference in age might give her pause. She knew nothing of my fortune, of which, on principle, I have always kept a secret. I, for my part, fascinated by her wit and manners, by the extent of her knowledge and her experience of the world, would have married her without a thought. At the same time, her reserve charmed me. If she had been the first to speak of marriage in a certain tone, I might perhaps have noted it as vulgar in that accomplished soul. 6 months, full and perfect, a diamond of the purest water. That has been my portion of love in this base world. One morning, attacked by the feverish stiffness which marks the beginning of a cold, I wrote her a line to put off one of those secret festivals which are buried under the roofs of Paris like pearls in the sea. No sooner was the letter sent than remorse seized me. She will not believe that I am ill, thought I. She was wont to affect jealousy and suspiciousness. When jealousy is genuine, said de Marsay, interrupting himself, It is the visible sign of a unique passion." "Why?" asked the Princesse de Cadignan eagerly. "Unique and true love," said de Marsay, "produces a sort of corporeal apathy attuned to the contemplation into which one falls. Then the mind complicates everything, it works on itself, pictures its fancies, turns them into reality and torment, and such jealousy is as delightful as it is distressing." A foreign minister smiled, as by the light of memory he felt the truth of this remark. "Besides," de Marsay went on, "I said to myself, why miss a happy hour? Was it not better to go, even though feverish? And then, if she learns that I am ill, I believe her capable of hurrying here and compromising herself. I made an effort, I wrote a second letter, and carried it myself, for my confidential servant was now gone. The river lay between us. I had to cross Paris, but at last, within a suitable distance of her house, I caught sight of a messenger. I charged him to have the note sent up to her at once, and I had the happy idea of driving past her door in a hackney cab to see whether she might not by chance receive the two letters together. At the moment when I arrived it was 2 o'clock. The great gate opened to admit a carriage. Whose? That of the stalking horse. It is 15 years since. Well, even while I tell the tale, I, the exhausted orator, the minister dried up by the friction of public business, I still feel a surging in my heart and the hot blood about my diaphragm. At the end of an hour I passed once more. The carriage was still in the courtyard. My note, no doubt, was in the porter's hands. At last, at 3:30, the carriage drove out. I could observe my rival's expression. He was grave and did not smile, but he was in love, and no doubt there was business in hand. I went to keep my appointment. The queen of my heart met me. I saw her calm, pure, serene. And here I must confess that I have always thought that Othello was not only stupid, but showed very bad taste. Only a man who was half a negro could behave so. Indeed, Shakespeare felt this when he called his play The Moor of Venice. The sight of the woman we love is such a balm to the heart that it must dispel anguish, doubt, and sorrow. All my rage vanished. I could smile again. Hence this cheerfulness, which at my age now would be the most atrocious dissimulation, was the result of my youth and my love. My jealousy once buried, I had the power of observation. My ailing condition was evident; the horrible doubts that had fermented in me increased it. At last I found an opening for putting in these words: "You have had no one with you this morning?" making a pretext of the uneasiness I had felt in the fear lest she should have disposed of her time after receiving my first note. "Ah," she exclaimed, "only a man could have such ideas! As if I could think of anything but your suffering! Till the moment when I received your second note, I could think only of how I could contrive to see you." "And you were alone?" "Alone," she said, looking at me with a face of innocence so perfect that it must have been his distrust of such a look as that which made the Moor kill Desdemona. As she lived alone in the house, the word was a fearful lie. One single lie destroys the absolute confidence which to some souls is the very foundation of happiness. To explain to you what passed in me at that moment, it must be assumed that we have an internal self, of which the exterior I is but the husk; that this self, as brilliant as light, is as fragile as a shade. Well, that beautiful self was in me thenceforth for ever shrouded in crape. Yes, I felt a cold and fleshless hand cast over me the winding sheet of experience, dooming me to the eternal mourning into which the first betrayal plunges the soul. As I cast my eyes down that she might not observe my dizziness, this proud thought somewhat restored my strength. If she is deceiving you, she is unworthy of you. I ascribed my sudden reddening and the tears which started to my eyes to an attack of pain, and the sweet creature insisted on driving me home with the blinds of the cab drawn. On the way she was full of a solicitude and tenderness that might have deceived the Moor of Venice, whom I have taken as a standard of comparison. Indeed, if that great child were to hesitate 2 seconds longer, every intelligent spectator feels that he would ask Desdemona's forgiveness. Thus, killing the woman is the act of a boy. She wept as we parted, so much was she distressed at being unable to nurse me herself. She wished she were my valet, in whose happiness she found a cause of envy, and all this was as elegantly expressed, as Clarissa might have written in her happiness. There is always a precious ape in the prettiest and most angelic woman. At these words all the women looked down, as if hurt by this brutal truth so brutally stated. "I will say nothing of the night, nor of the week I spent," de Marsay went on. "I discovered that I was a statesman." It was so well said that we all uttered an admiring exclamation. "As I thought over the really cruel vengeance to be taken on a woman," said de Marsay, continuing his story, with infernal ingenuity, for, as we had loved each other, some terrible and irreparable revenges were possible, I despised myself. I felt how common I was. I insensibly formulated a horrible code, that of indulgence. In taking vengeance on a woman, do we not in fact admit that there is but one for us, that we cannot do without her? And then, is revenge the way to win her back? If she is not indispensable, if there are other women in the world, why not grant her the right to change what we assume? This, of course, applies only to passion. In any other sense it would be socially wrong. Nothing more clearly proves the necessity for indissoluble marriage than the instability of passion. The two sexes must be chained up, like wild beasts as they are, by the inevitable law, deaf and mute. Eliminate revenge, and infidelity in love is nothing. Those who believe that for them there is but one woman in the world must be in favor of vengeance, and then there is but one form of it, that of Othello. Mine was different. The words produced in each of us the imperceptible movement which newspaper writers represent in parliamentary reports by the words "great sensation." Cured of my cold and of my pure, absolute divine love, I flung myself into an adventure of which the heroine was charming, and of a style of beauty utterly opposed to that of my deceiving angel. I took care not to quarrel with this clever woman, who was so good an actress, for I doubt whether true love can give such gracious delights as those lavished by such a dexterous fraud. Such refined hypocrisy is as good as virtue. "I am not speaking to you English women, my lady," said the minister suavely, addressing Lady Barrymore, Lord Dudley's daughter. "I tried to be the same lover. I wished to have some of my hair worked up for my new angel, and I went to a skilled artist who at that time dwelt in the Rue Boucher. The man had a monopoly of capillary keepsakes, and I mention his address for the benefit of those who have not much hair. He has plenty of every kind and every color. After I had explained my order, he showed me his work. I then saw achievements of patience surpassing those which the story books ascribe to fairies, or which are executed by prisoners. He brought me up to date as to the caprices and the fashions governing the use of hair. 'For the last year,' said he, 'there has been a rage for marking linen with hair. Happily, I have a fine collection of hair, and skilled needlewomen.' On hearing this, a suspicion flashed upon me. I took out my handkerchief and said, 'So, this was done in your shop, with false hair?' He looked at the handkerchief and said, 'Aye, that lady was very particular. She insisted on verifying the tint of the hair. My wife herself marked those handkerchiefs. You have there, sir, one of the finest pieces of work we have ever executed.' Before this last ray of light, I might have believed something, might have taken a woman's word. I left the shop, still having faith in pleasure, but where love was concerned, I was as atheistical as a mathematician. 2 months later I was sitting by the side of the ethereal being in her boudoir, on her sofa. I was holding one of her hands, they were very beautiful, and we scaled the Alps of sentiment, culling their sweetest flowers and pulling off the daisy petals. There is always a moment when one pulls daisies to pieces, even if it is in a drawing room and there are no daisies. At the intensest moment of tenderness, and when we are most in love, love is so well aware of its own short duration that we are irresistibly urged to ask, "Do you love me? Will you love me always?" I seized the elegiac moment, so warm, so flowery, so full blown, to lead her to tell her most delightful lies in the enchanting language of love. Charlotte displayed her choicest allurements. She could not live without me. I was to her the only man in the world. She feared to weary me, because my presence bereft her of all her wits. With me all her faculties were lost in love. She was indeed too tender to escape alarms. For the last 6 months she had been seeking some way to bind me to her eternally, and God alone knew that secret. In short, I was her God. The women who heard de Marsay seemed offended by seeing themselves so well acted, for he seconded the words by airs, and sidelong attitudes, and mincing grimaces which were quite illusory. At the very moment when I might have believed these adorable falsehoods, as I still held her right hand in mine, I said to her, "When are you to marry the Duke?" The thrust was so direct, my gaze met hers so boldly, and her hand lay so tightly in mine, that her start, slight as it was, could not be disguised. Her eyes fell before mine, and a faint blush coloured her cheeks. "The Duke? What do you mean?" she said, affecting great astonishment. "I know everything," replied I, "and in my opinion you should delay no longer. He is rich, he is a duke, but he is more than devout, he is religious. I am sure, therefore, that you have been faithful to me, thanks to his scruples. You cannot imagine how urgently necessary it is that you should compromise him with himself and with God. Short of that you will never bring him to the point." "Is this a dream?" she said, pushing her hair from her forehead, 15 years before Malibran, with the gesture which Malibran has made so famous. "Come, do not be childish, my angel," said I, trying to take her hands, but she folded them before her with a little prudish and indignant mien. "Marry him, you have my permission," said I, replying to this gesture by using the formal vous instead of tu. "Nay, better, I beg you to do so." "But," cried she, falling at my knees, "there is some horrible mistake. I love no one in the world but you. You may demand any proofs you please." "Rise, my dear," said I, "and do me the honor of being truthful." "As before God." "Do you doubt my love?" "No." "Nor my fidelity?" "No." "Well, I have committed the greatest crime," I went on. "I have doubted your love and your fidelity. Between 2 intoxications I looked calmly about me." "Calmly," sighed she. "That is enough, Henri. You no longer love me." She had at once found, you perceive, a loophole for escape. In scenes like these an adverb is dangerous. But happily curiosity made her add, "And what did you see? Have I ever spoken of the Duke excepting in public? Have you detected in my eyes—" "No," said I, "but in his. And you have 8 times made me go to Saint Thomas d'Aquin to see you listening to the same mass as he." "Ah!" she exclaimed, "then I have made you jealous." "Oh, I only wish I could be," said I, admiring the pliancy of her quick intelligence and these acrobatic feats which can only be successful in the eyes of the blind. "But by dint of going to church I have become very incredulous. On the day of my first cold and your first treachery, when you thought I was in bed, you received the Duke, and you told me you had seen no one." "Do you know that your conduct is infamous?" "In what respect? I consider your marriage to the Duke an excellent arrangement. He gives you a great name, the only rank that suits you, a brilliant and distinguished position. You will be one of the queens of Paris. I should be doing you a wrong if I placed any obstacle in the way of this prospect, this distinguished life, this splendid alliance. Ah, Charlotte, some day you will do me justice by discovering how unlike my character is to that of other young men. You would have been compelled to deceive me. Yes, you would have found it very difficult to break with me, for he watches you. It is time that we should part, for the Duke is rigidly virtuous. You must turn prude. I advise you to do so. The Duke is vain. He will be proud of his wife." "Oh," cried she, bursting into tears, "Henri, if only you had spoken! Yes, if you had chosen! It was I who was to blame, you understand. We would have gone to live all our days in a corner, married, happy, and defied the world." "Well, it is too late now," said I, kissing her hands and putting on a victimized air. "Good God, but I can undo it all," said she. "No, you have gone too far with the Duke. I ought indeed to go on a journey to part us more effectually. We should both have reason to fear our own affection. Henri, do you think the Duke has any suspicions?" I was still Henri, but the tu was lost for ever. "I do not think so," I replied, assuming the manner of a friend. "But be as devout as possible. Reconcile yourself to God, for the Duke waits for proofs. He hesitates, and you must bring him to the point." She rose and walked twice round the boudoir in real or affected agitation. Then she no doubt found an attitude and a look beseeming the new state of affairs, for she stopped in front of me, held out her hand, and said in a voice broken by emotion, "Well, Henri, you are loyal, noble, and a charming man. I shall never forget you." These were admirable tactics. She was bewitching in this transition of feeling, indispensable to the situation in which she wished to place herself in regard to me. I fell into the attitude, the manners, and the look of a man so deeply distressed that I saw her too newly assumed dignity giving way. She looked at me, took my hand, drew me along almost, threw me on the sofa, but quite gently, and after a moment's silence, "I am dreadfully unhappy, my dear fellow. Do you love me?" "Oh, yes." "Well, then, what will become of you?" At this point the women all looked at each other. "Though I can still suffer when I recall her perfidy, I still laugh at her expression of entire conviction and sweet satisfaction that I must die, or at any rate sink into perpetual melancholy," de Marsay went on. "Oh, do not laugh yet," he said to his listeners. "There is better to come." I looked at her very tenderly after a pause, and said to her, "Yes, that is what I have been wondering." "Well, what will you do?" "I asked myself that the day after my cold." "And?" she asked with eager anxiety. "And I have made advances to the little lady to whom I was supposed to be attached." Charlotte started up from the sofa like a frightened doe, trembling like a leaf, gave me one of those looks in which women forgo all their dignity, all their modesty, their refinement, and even their grace, the sparkling glitter of a hunted viper's eye when driven into a corner, and said, "And I have loved this man, I have struggled, I have—" On this last thought, which I leave you to guess, she made the most impressive pause I ever heard. "Good God!" she cried, "how unhappy are we women! We can never be loved. To you there is nothing serious in the purest feelings. But never mind, when you cheat us you are still our dupes." "I see that plainly," said I, with a stricken air. "You have far too much wit in your anger for your heart to suffer from it." This modest epigram increased her rage. She found some tears of vexation. "You disgust me with the world and with life," she said. "You snatch away all my illusions. You deprave my heart." She said to me all that I had a right to say to her, and with a simple effrontery, an artless audacity, which would certainly have nailed any man but me on the spot. What is to become of us poor women in a state of society such as Louis XVIII's charter made it? Imagine how her words had run away with her. Yes, indeed, we are born to suffer. In matters of passion we are always superior to you, and you are beneath all loyalty. There is no honesty in your hearts. To you, love is a game in which you always cheat." "My dear," said I, "to take anything serious in society nowadays would be like making romantic love to an actress." "What a shameless betrayal! It was deliberately planned." "No, only a rational issue." "Good bye, Monsieur de Marsay," she said. "You have deceived me horribly." "Surely," I replied, taking up a submissive attitude, "Madame la Duchesse will not remember Charlotte's grievances?" "Certainly," she answered bitterly. "Then in fact you hate me?" She bowed, and I said to myself, "There is something still left." The feeling she had when I parted from her allowed her to believe that she still had something to avenge. Well, my friends, I have carefully studied the lives of men who have had great success with women, but I do not believe that the Maréchal de Richelieu, or Lauzun, or Louis de Valois ever effected a more judicious retreat at the first attempt. As to my mind and heart, they were cast in a mould then and there, once for all, and the power of control I thus acquired over the thoughtless impulses which make us commit so many follies gained me the admirable presence of mind you all know. End of Section 1